Welcome to all of you. I wanted to start the meeting by showing you our Louisiana Master Naturalist of New Orleans website, in which you can find all of the seminars that we've scheduled since the beginning of June. Well, not all, most of the seminars are recorded and posted here to our website. So you can go back. We started, looks like the very first week of June, and we've got almost all of these recorded and posted. So you can go back and look at what we've been doing in the past several months. The next seminar will be on December 2nd. Our presenter is one of our Master Naturalist board members, Tani Janice, and she'll talk about wildlife in your backyard. From December on, we're going to go to only one seminar a month, and that will be the first Wednesday of each month. So the first Wednesday in January, Courtney Forbes, who I think I saw her name here. Courtney, you want to wave? Can you say 2 sentences about your seminar, please?
Well, I think we're going to be looking at climate, and my real interest is how does that intersect with our interest as naturalists, and what do we see going on in our backyards?
Great, great. I look forward to that, Courtney. Okay, Amy.
Great. So I'm excited and honored to be the moderator tonight for Faye Matthews, who's going to speak to us about some really cool things I think we'll all find interesting. And to get us started, I wanted to show you her website that I'm sure she will explain everything that she's doing there. But Faye her title is a legal policy advisor and senior partnership manager, Mississippi River Delta Restoration Program, National Wildlife Federation. Faye is a legal policy advisor and senior partnership manager for the National Wildlife Federation's Gulf Restoration and Mississippi River Delta Restoration programs. As legal policy advisor, Faye provides day-to-day advice, including on issues affecting coastal protection and restoration initiatives. As senior partnership manager, Faye works with various stakeholders in the commercial fishing industry to address challenges in the face of our rapidly changing environment. Faye came to the National Wildlife Federation from Capitol Hill, where she worked on the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources as legislative counsel for Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State and former Senator Mary Landrieu from Louisiana. She also worked of counsel at Waltzer, Weigel and Garside, sorry if I murdered that, a law firm in Gretna, Louisiana, specializing in environmental law. Faye is a New Orleans native. She holds her JD from Southern University Law Center and her BS in psychology from the University of New Orleans. So that gives you a little bit of a background of what she's going to speak about. She also is a member of the fall 2019 Master Naturalist cohort. And so she's one of us. So that's exciting. And so I asked Faye before most of you joined if she would like to take questions along the way or at the end, and she prefers to take them at the end. So if you have a burning question that you want to know the answer to, please put it in the chat, and when Faye is finished with her presentation, we will go through and allow her the opportunity to respond to those questions. So without further ado, Faye Matthews, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And I will say thank you for joining the presentation, even though this is our second date. We got rescheduled because of Hurricane Zeta, which hurricanes are going to be a topic for tonight and how they play into and have a role in our land loss crisis in Louisiana. Class is over at 8, I understand. I have a presentation that has lots of slides, maybe 40. So I will fly through the presentation. There's a video at the end. And if it does present that there's no time at the end, I'm always available to take emails and subsequent follow-up.
Well,
All right.
we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. We'll make time.
Okay.
Before you share, when you share your screen, there's an option to share your computer sound. And since you do have a video, make sure you check that option. Once you press share screen, on your bottom left, you'll see a little box for that. So make sure you check it before you share.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to get started, and some slides are less important than others. Where they are, if there's information that's not so important, I'll just fly through the slides just so I can get to the end. So I am Faye Matthews. I serve as the legal policy advisor and senior partnership manager with the National Wildlife Federation. Our Mississippi River Delta restoration program has been, will be formally dissolved, and our Gulf program will encompass all of our Mississippi River Delta work, and that's a change as of 2020. Restore the Mississippi River Delta, we are a coalition of 5 organizations: the National Wildlife Federation, the Environmental Defense Fund, Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, which is now Pontchartrain Conservancy. There's a new icon here. And then the National Audubon Society. We are a coalition. We, in 2005, after the devastating Hurricane Katrina, there were a lot of efforts to really go on and find ways to collectively and in an organized way deal with Louisiana's land loss crisis, which has been upon us for a century or longer. We really got core after the BP oil spill and work to advance large-scale restoration projects, particularly through the use of sediment. And we advocate for funding for the state's $50 billion 50-year coastal master plan, which now with inflation can creep up to $100 billion. So the Mississippi River Delta is of national significance. It comprises 40% of our coastal wetlands in the lower 48. The Mississippi River Delta was built over thousands of years by Mississippi River floodwaters. Now, significance, and we restore. At Restore, we advocate to restore coastal, which is a part of the Mississippi River Delta, for the purpose of making sure there's a sustainable future for people, the economy, and wildlife. Dynamic species, this is Master Naturalist. And I will say that I have the, privilege of being able to see firsthand some of the dynamic species that are along our coast. We have a very productive estuary, inclusive of lots of different habitats. Purposes of our Master Naturalist birds focus, we have Audubon Louisiana has put out a landscape of vital birds, bird habitats, birds of our coast. And if you want information, more information, you can visit la.audubon.org. So in order to understand the land loss crisis, it's very important to understand first how the Delta formed. It is important in understanding how we think about solutions, particularly using sediment to restore parts of the Delta. This is the Mississippi River Drainage Basin. The Mississippi River Delta is here. The Burkutts Delta the Mississippi River drainage basin. We drain water from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces, and all of the water funnels down eventually and empties out of the Gulf of Mexico. Delta lobe switching. Over 7,000 years ago, the Mississippi River switched its delta at various stages along the way, and our Bird's Foot Delta is 6, and we've managed to hold our Bird's Foot Delta in place by leveeing the Mississippi River. So the river built the delta. Here we have New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and Houma. And I will fly through a series of slides that will eventually get to our modern day Bird's Foot Delta. Our levee system. And right about here is where the old river control structure controls the flow and constricts the flow of the Mississippi River to allow 70% of the flow to go out the mouth of the Mississippi at the Bird's Foot and 30% out the Atchafalaya. So we have our modern day Bird's Foot Delta. These are some really cool images that I was able to capture from NASA. This one, the one on the right, is pretty cool. Really shows the delta from a top angle. A system in collapse. We have Louisiana's wetlands provide a natural buffer against hurricanes, but they've been heavily damaged over the past century for various reasons that we'll touch on. So this says today, but this photo was actually taken in 2011. This shows the modern Delta. This shows New Orleans. This is the Pontchartrain Basin. Grand Isle is here. And Grand Isle, of course, I'm not sure I was able to be part of the last Master Naturalist class before 2020. We took a really cool trip to Elmer's Island and were able to see what is known as the last inhabited barrier island. So Louisiana coastal land loss. We've lost over 1,900 square miles since 1932. We are on track to lose another 50. I'm sorry, another 2,000. 1,900 square miles is roughly the size of Delaware, and our coastal land loss, wetland loss, is rapidly, more quickly than we thought, continuing. Causes of land loss, lots of causes are levees, which are first in our system. We have dams upriver, of course, navigation, oil and gas, canals that have not been backfilled, and saltwater, it allows saltwater to intrude into the marsh area, killing the marsh. Oil spill, the oil spill in 2010 accelerated. We found that it accelerated our coastal land loss rate. Hurricanes, lots of hurricanes. It's 2020. I think we're up to 8. We have, with the fur trade in the late 1800s, invasives, nutria, and climate-driven sea level rise. So this is just a picture of our levee system that was being built in 33. We have, this would be the river at flood stage. This natural levee sits here, and then the man-made levee stops the river from overflowing, which would allow silt, clay, and sand normally to overflow the banks of the river and build land. So our land loss issue was actually predicted back in 1897 when the Corps put in for an appropriation authorization and was later appropriated monies to build an innovative levee. So this is from a National Geographic article, Delta of the Mississippi. I'm going to sum it up. Essentially, the article says that we have had enormous economic benefit because of the levee and the protection that it's been able to give to us, and it will come at a cost. That cost was predicted in 2004, right before Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And now a different National Geographic article ironically predicted that the results in the outcome of a storm would be catastrophic. So we create problems when we do things, but of course we live here. Sediment-starved system. Naturally, the Mississippi River would flow out to the Birdsfoot Delta. And in the past, we've had, before the system was levied, we had natural floods, annual floods would overflow the levees and overtop the levees and nourish the wetlands. And so this just shows, this is the Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Bourne area, and this is the Birdsfoot Delta, which is an illustration of sediment that we are not capturing. So we have a pretty big undertaking. We have a pretty big problem. Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan was developed, the first plan in 2007, $50 billion over 50 years. That has since, with inflation, been estimated to, in the end, maybe cost as much as $100 billion. The objective of the plan is for flood protection to mimic natural processes. So the natural process of the river in overflowing the banks and that sediment being deposited into areas that need them, restoration of coastal habitats, sustaining cultural heritage, and having a working coast. Decision drivers, flood risk reduction, and land building. And so the Coastal Master Plan takes into account, it's a multiple lines of defense approach. It's a pretty big problem that we have. And so we all understand that it's no one thing that can solve the problem. It will be an all of the above approach, which will encompass lots of tools and the use of lots of mechanisms to restore the coast. Sediment diversions, shoreline protection, ridge restoration, marsh creation, dredging, hydrologic restoration, bank stabilization, oyster barrier reef, and barrier island restoration. This is a snapshot of the Coastal Master Plan from 2017. And this illustration shows the various projects across the coast from west to east. And again, they are restoration and risk reduction, restoration and risk reduction. Barrier Island restoration. I just pulled out a couple of examples for using different tools. Marsh creation, can build land quickly and strategically, can be built using sediment from a variety of sources, doesn't address underlying issues, and it lacks the complexity of natural wetlands. And that would essentially involve using a pipe to pull sediment out of the Mississippi River and put it into the marsh that you want to rebuild. Sediment diversions are the cornerstone of the Coastal Master Plan. Sediment diversions, they are a gated structure built into the river levee, open to capture sediment, and can build new wetlands and help sustain existing wetlands. So Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan is the latest plan, 2017, includes options or projects that are either freshwater diversions or sediment diversions. And the idea is to mimic the natural process and get sediment from the Mississippi River and deposit it into the starved areas. And here, this is the Mississippi River. This is Plaquemines Parish. This is the Mid-Barataria and the Mid-Breton sediment diversion. Mid-Barataria, there is the process for this one right now. The status of the process for the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion is that it is in its permitting phase. There will be a draft EIS, and it is expected to come in the spring of 2021. And the Mid-Breton project status, they actually just went through the scoping process a few months ago. So this is from the 2017 plan, and it's just various freshwater and sediment diversion projects are part of the master plan. Considerations, lots of considerations to make, not just with sediment diversions, but with all projects. Social, including impacts to historically disadvantaged communities, commercial and recreational fisheries, special interests and other special interests rather in society broadly, political and culture. Lots of considerations to make. So the Coastal Master Plan strives to offer, what does it offer? Time for us to prepare and adapt to a coast that will change rather quickly. We have diversity of projects, 76 restoration, 12 structural, 32 non-structural, builds and sustains land, reduces risk, benefits to the ecosystem, and economic development opportunities. I did pull out from the Coastal Master Plan fact sheets from Fort Orleans Parish, just to highlight some of the projects that are being that are in the master plan to benefit New Orleans and surrounding areas. Zeroed in, and their risk reduction projects and restoration projects. We have the New Orleans East Land Bridge, which is in both in the year 1 and year 10, and these times just relate to whether there are various stages that these projects have to go through: engineer, design, implementation, and then there are funding shortfalls that come with implementing a $50 billion plan. But the New Orleans East Land Bridge, I will say there was an announcement yesterday from the city of New Orleans. The city just received a $500 million grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the New Orleans East Land Bridge restoration project. So the future depends on us. What must we do to have the best outcomes? Execute and fully implement the Coastal Master Plan and reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly. And I'll talk about this some more in a later slide. Our 2012 master plan, there is best case, worst case, medium case scenarios, and new information that we know about sea level rise and how it impacts Louisiana at a rate that's 4 times any place else in the world, is that our 2012 master plan best case scenario is for sea level rise is now the worst case scenario. That essentially means that we are operating at a sense of loss. So even if we have $50 billion to implement all projects on time and in the manner that the Coastal Master Plan proposes to, then we'll still operate at a deficit. And that is because the seas are rising more quickly than we thought. And we have subsidence, so we're sinking. We're sinking and seas are rising. So from the Coastal Master Plan land estimates, medium case scenario assumes that we have a sea level rise increase by 2.07 feet. And the high scenario assumes that we have sea level rise that increases by 2.7 feet, which is 3 feet, essentially 3 feet. So this came from an article that rolled out some of the studies on sea level rise and how it could impact Louisiana. And this is just an illustration of what Louisiana could look like 2050. But won't, because we won't have 6 feet of sea level rise. We're going to do everything we can. So in addition to the Coastal Master Plan and implementing the things that are, all the projects that are in it, Louisiana, we found the need, because sea level rise projections are greater than we initially thought. There was a need to expand coastal restoration and flood protection efforts in August 2020. Governor John Bell Edwards executed an executive order and created the Climate Initiatives Task Force to target greenhouse gas reductions, which are pretty ambitious. The Climate Task Force met for the first time, I believe, 2 weeks ago. It's comprised of 23 officials, scientists, and members who are directed to address different parts of the economy and find ways to reduce emissions through various initiatives. Interim recommendations are due by 2021, February, and the final by February 2022. But given where we are, will probably think that it's a very urgent problem and it has to happen, but I'm not sure about these timelines. The executive order directs CPRA to consider recommendations from the Climate Initiatives Task Force for reducing emissions for inclusion in the next master plan, which is slated to come out every 5 years. So we are in the process, the state's in the process of planning the 2023 master plan. And if you have any really good ideas, they are taking in feedback. So, continuing challenges, lots, time, land loss. Land loss is accelerated, it's quicker than we thought. Sea level rise is, projections are greater than we initially thought. Money, funding, $50 billion over 50 years. Markets, insurance, investments, and then emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Lots. I managed to finish at 7:30, and I will play this video. It's video that Louisiana put out in an effort to, we talk about our significance to the rest of the world, to the rest of the country, and what the importance of the Mississippi River Delta is across the board. And this video makes me smile because because it's beautiful. They're not saying that it's, you know, great things happen in it and it talks about land loss, but this gives me hope and the courage to go on to fight land loss. If it will play.
Louisiana's story is not just Louisiana's story. It is
Can you still see my screen?
Louisiana's story is not just Louisiana's story is not just Louisiana's story. It is your story too, America. Sediment from the Mississippi River built the central part of our country from Missouri to the Gulf. It is your Delta, America, and it's in trouble. But in Louisiana, we're fighting to save it, for us and for you.
What has happened down here is the wind have changed.
Louisiana was growing by 3/4 of a square mile per year until levees completely channelized the river in the 1930s, cutting off our distributaries and starving our coast of the sediment that kept it alive and growing.
6 feet of water in the streets of Evangeline.
Now, instead of being 60 square miles bigger, we are 1,900 square miles smaller, the equivalent of losing the landmass of New York City every 13 years. Our layer cake of sediment has compacted and subsided. With no new layers to offset the loss, marshes sink, salt water intrudes, and we lose our buffer against storms that destroy land, homes, and lives, and threaten an infrastructure that fuels America.
Louisiana, Louisiana, that time to wash us away.
But since the devastation of 2005, we've begun to fight like never before. We've built or improved more than 160 miles of levees, installed new world record flood control structures, created 20,000 acres of land and marsh by using sediment dredged from the river and offshore. We're rebuilding our chain of barrier islands and plan to reconnect the river in a controlled way to rebuild our protective buffers by mimicking Mother Nature. We've replaced defective walls around New Orleans with bigger, better ones, created massive floodgates, and installed the largest pump station in the world. We are guided by a master plan, scientifically shown to be effective at reversing land loss. So, our path forward is clear.
Louisiana.
Storms, floods, and man-made disasters may disrupt our timing and increase our workload, but we work on because we must. Louisiana is at stake, and our reality is yours too, America.
Louisiana, Louisiana, they're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away.
All right, so take action. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito, an African proverb coded by the Dalai Lama. Of opportunities to volunteer, visit with legislators, write your officials, plant trees, lots of volunteer opportunities. So You can get more information at our website. And I am done.
Awesome, Faye. Thank you so much. I just put that last
Share.
URL that you had posted in the
Great.
chat for everybody. So so let's thank you for
Lots
that
of
information. It
questions.
was great. Yeah. So we'll start with I think that's Janelle wanted to know, do you know how the 70-30 split at the old river control structure was decided?
So the idea was to relieve pressure going down the original Birdsfoot Delta through the original Birdsfoot Delta, but it's what the Corps came up with. There are lots of private interests down near the Morganza spillway, and we wanted to find ways to stop the river from taking the shortest route to the Mississippi, which was the Atchafalaya. So it was a way to establish and keep the river flowing through the Birdsfoot Delta to maintain the Birdsfoot Delta.
Great, thank you. Lana says that my understanding of the sediment diversion, the Corps of Engineers cannot tell us how much sediment will be deposited because they don't know. I think that's more of a comment than a question. Lana, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and maybe clarify. Nope. Okay. Oh, yeah, there you go. Go ahead, Lana.
My understanding is that the Corps of Engineers cannot tell how much sediment will be deposited from the Mississippi River in today's standards.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in, Lana. So we definitely know that the amount of sediment in the river is decreasing because of all the erosion control that's going on upriver, right, in the agricultural areas, all the dams. So over time, we're definitely seeing a huge decrease in the amount of sediment possible to get from the river. So, you know, I suppose they have mathematicians who are modeling this, but you're right, they don't know.
They don't. And that's my point. They don't know.
Yeah.
They can't tell you. And they're going to do this big diversion without knowing the amount of sediment that is going to go into the wetlands and, you know, ruin the ecosystem because of the amount of fresh water going into the estuaries.
There's absolutely less sediment in the river. There are 11 sandbars near the structure where the sediment diversions are proposed, and there's a great sense for what's in, how much sediment has been deposited in the past and how much sediment is sitting in the bottom of the river now. So we dredge, we find ways to get some of the sediment out through previous projects, some being implemented right now, but there is less sediment, but there is sediment in the river now. We know that we're losing it.
I understand that, but you know, I'm a family of oyster fishermen, and so my family history and heritage is in the oyster industry, and that is at risk with this new big diversion that's being planned. And I have seen really great progress done with smaller projects where they were rebuilding the coastland and the marshland by different projects than opening up the river diversions.
Marsh creation works. We know they work. We know that marsh creation works. Doesn't sustain land. And when yep, Lana, I'm
Lana,
sorry, were you saying something?
This is Janelle again. Lana, did you?
I'm passionate about this because my family comes from the coast, the marshland. My mother was born, lived in the camp in the bayou, and my eyes have seen all of that disappear. And, what is the answer? I don't know. But this big diversion project that they have planned for Louisiana to protect New Orleans, I really don't know if that's going to work or not, because they can't tell you how much sediment will be deposited from the river.
Yep, Atlanta, there are models and ideas. Of course, you've been following this. There are models that predict how much sediment gets deposited. The sediment diversions are proposed to capture the greatest amount of sediment and adaptively managed over time to make sure that it's actually doing it is intended to do. But of course, modeling and there's the other processes to determine how much sediment is getting in based on historic information.
So the next question comes from Janelle again. What will happen to the master plan when BP funds run out? You actually mentioned that with inflation, it's probably really 100 billion. So good question.
So the $50 billion figure was in 2007, assuming that all projects in the 2007 plan would be implemented and funded. So the entire plan would be put in to play and implemented by 2067, which is 50 years. What happens when the master plan, when BP funds run out? There are various other sources that the master plan gets funded through, including GOMESA, including state surplus funds, including QIPRA. So we're absolutely funding through various federal and state dollars, and then including private money and money from nonprofits to fund.
Bonnie wants to know, she said, did I understand you to say that sea level was rising 4 times faster than anticipated? And how would Louisiana reduce greenhouse gases? Well, we'll start with the first one. Sorry, about sea level rising.
Yep, so NOAA and then some of the international studies, they've gone on. There are satellites and different equipment that measure sea level rise. They are out and they are measuring every 6 minutes. We have a pretty good sense for the rate of land subsidence in Louisiana, and so there's a pretty good way to measure that. And
following up, Lana had a comment that it sounds like
and sea level rise is actually one of the easiest things to know, because molecules they shrink and expand based on the water.
Okay, and then how would Louisiana reduce greenhouse gases?
Lots of things. I don't know, and I think that I don't know the one answer to that. I think that will be all of the above, and what the climate task force has been charged with figuring out. But one would be to think about how we permit and allow new and existing facilities to emit gases, emit lots of things. One thing I will say about the Coastal Master Plan wetlands are actually their carbon sink. So nutrients are reduced through and so one thing that we can do is make sure that we are creating and restoring the greatest amount of wetlands. But the overall answer for how we reduce will be a serious task. It's a real task. It's a real task that we have ahead of us.
Well, I think what you said earlier about John Bell Edwards' executive order is a step in the right direction, because we haven't had that from the leadership in the past that I know of anyway. Good. Do you know the result of the litigation to require oil and gas companies to fill canals?
So in this legislative session, there was a bill introduced in the midst of a pandemic to have the coastal land loss litigation lawsuits kicked out of court. That measure failed. I believe that there will be measures in the future to try to do the same. And there were at least three cases that were sent from federal court back to state court. So there's a big jurisdiction fight. It's a fight of whether you are in federal court and sort of isolated from the local politics, or whether state courts will try a case which is not very favorable for oil and gas defendants. My understanding of where that was, at least in the last 2 months, is that there were at least 5 or 6 of those cases that were removed from federal court and sent back to state court. There is a chance that if the lawsuits are successful, they could be a huge fund. They could be that can be a revenue, a way for us to fund our coastal restoration plan. We also have last year, Freeport-McMoRan settled their case with coastal parishes for $100 million plus mitigation credits. I'm not sure how many mitigation credits, but Freeport-McMoRan was found to only have operated in 0.4% of the overall oil and gas damage that's alleged. So if Freeport-McMoRan can settle for the $100 million, there's a great chance that some of the major players can also settle and pay more. And it's a contractual obligation.
So Bonnie's interested if you can tell her what CPRA stands for and if it's involved in your coalition.
So it's a Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. The CPRA was stood up, established in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina. It's a state agency, and CPRA is a state agency. National Wildlife Federation is part of Restore. All of our organizations are nonprofit organizations. So the answer to the second question is no.
So Kelly's interested in finding out if your organization engages local communities in the work you do related to land loss and diversions.
Yes.
And yeah, she said your bio mentions working with local fishing communities. She'd love to hear more about these relationships.
Yep. So I moved back to Louisiana. I will first say that I am Louisiana, New Orleans, born and raised. My grandfather was he was a fisherman. He fished out in Lake Bourne, fished out in Lake Pontchartrain. He was also a musician. I moved off to DC, came back to Louisiana in 2017 and worked of counsel at a firm out on the West Bank, and got involved in some of the more coastal fishing work in doing that work and representing some of the fishermen down in Pointe-a-la-Hache in a lawsuit against oil and gas. It's all oil and gas, always oil and gas. And then in some of that work, my job was to figure out how to craft how to craft options for people who have been either pushed out of the industry and create ways for people to be able to get in the industry where they were pushed out, and create different economic opportunities for people who are wanting to stay on the coast. Most of my work is, mostly with minority fishermen and fishermen who are engaged in aquaculture. So offshore, not offshore, oyster aquaculture, alternative oyster culture.
Courtney's interested if oil and gas workers could be put to work capping old wells and reducing methane emissions. That would be a job creation for oil and gas. So I guess it's more of a statement, but maybe you could comment about that.
I personally think that that's a great way to start to reinvigorate the economy and find ways to allow people to use their skills in oil and gas industry in other fields. I think so. I agree with you, Donna. Not Donna. Hi, Donna. I agree with you, Courtney. And I think that it may be one initiative that the Climate Task Force looks at. So we'll see what happens and what comes out in the initiatives plan.
Great.
But I agree. And there's also one other thing. They, along with the Climate Task Force and what they will do, there was one question early on about how the state will look at reducing greenhouse gases. During the first meeting of the Climate Task Force, the governor did ask, he did put in a request for the federal advisory team, one of the federal advisory teams, to start looking at wind potential and really think about what wind potential could look like off the Gulf Coast.
Awesome. So I guess that's all the questions that we have. There's a couple of comments talking about how great your presentation was, but I'd like to see if anybody wanted to unmute and ask any more questions. So kind of last call for questions for Faye or comments.
So the one thing, I skipped a lot of the details in my presentation because I did need to get through it. But I do want to say that the Coastal Master Plan is centered on keeping people in place as long as possible before parts of Louisiana. We are already seeing population shifts from some of the lower lying coastal areas inland. So the Coastal Master Plan is centered on keeping people in place for as long as possible. However, there will be a time that we have to really be thoughtful about what it looks like if we don't have success. So I saw Bonnie's comment and thought that I wanted to say that one initiative that I didn't highlight is the LA Safe. It's the Louisiana Adaptation Strategies. There's something futures. That initiative in part focuses on managed retreat and would look like for communities. If you're gonna be eventually get into a place where communities are moving, communities should be engaged at the very granular level on what that looks like. So that we're preventing, with Louisiana, we have the first climate refugees in St. Charles, and we want to prevent having that across the coast. There's a community in Alaska having the same issues, and we really have to be thoughtful about how we plan for that.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for the work that you do that's so important for our coastline, and taking the time to talk about it with all of us. We appreciate it. So Janelle, I want to turn it over to you, see if you have any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Faye. That really was an interesting presentation and quite a challenge for all of us. I mean, I hear Lana speaking about what she grew up with. I grew up with oil and gas. And so tell my cousins and my nephews that you're not going to work in the oil field anymore, that's a huge culture shock. And, you know, to think about the coastal communities and tell them, you know, the sea level's rising at, you know, X centimeters a year, it's a real challenge to go forward. So we very much appreciate the work that you do, Faye. And we'll see you after Thanksgiving. Be safe.